pleased to welcome Paul Driver, who will be talking to us today about the anatomy of a contrived experience, the making and breaking of virtual reality in education. Paul is a senior learning technologist at Anglia Ruskin University. He specializes in immersive virtual scenario creation and holds an MA in creative media practice and education. He has 25 years of teaching experience and is an award-winning ELT materials writer, a teacher trainer, and a graphic designer. Paul has been nominated for 4 English Language Teaching Innovation Awards, and in 2018, he received the National Learning Technologist of the Year award. Paul's research interests span across many fields, exploring the roles of technology, media, game design, play, and embodied cognition in the process of learning. So with that, Paul, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Yeah, and good morning to everybody, wherever you are. It's a very drizzly Cambridge morning where I am. But anyway, we've got lots of exciting things to look at this morning. So the title of my talk is The Anatomy of a Contrived Experience. It sounds like a bit of a contrived title for a talk, but really what I want to do in this talk is to share my experiences, the highs, the lows, the ups, the downs in the making of virtual reality content to use with my students and with other students at the university. As I'm talking, there'll be examples from ELT, but also examples from teacher training, from the training of nurses, from training sports scientists, at all different contexts. But the unifying thing is the use of virtual reality. Now, virtual reality has come a long way in recent years, and it's sort of split into different kinds of experience. And I think that the two main categories are really the computer game style of virtual reality, which is often made using the same software tools that are used to make video games. So these are game engines, and these are completely fabricated environments. So they're using computer generated graphics. They're quite sophisticated and expensive to produce, usually whole teams of people, or more frequently, a big company producing that kind of media. The problem with that kind of media is, as I mentioned, it's really expensive. What I've gone for is more low-tech virtual reality, which is using a combination mainly of 360-degree cameras, and then using some special software that allows me to add information as a separate layer that sits over the top of that 360-degree videos. Now, there is a sort of hybrid between the two, the CGI and the 360 video, in that you can also add 3D models to 360-degree video, so that within that video you can see a 3D model appear and you can interact with it. So there is really a sliding scale from the low tech to the high tech. But the kinds of things I'm talking to you about today are all things that can be done just by one person with some fairly inexpensive equipment. So a fairly cheap 300, when I say fairly cheap, sort of £300, £400 for a fairly good 360-degree camera. And then there's lots of different software options, going from things like ThingLink, which will cost you about sort of, £80, £90 a year, going up to things like Uptail, which I use, and then there's ViAR 360 and some other platforms that enable you to create these educational materials. And I see it as being something quite similar to the old days when I remember when I was teaching in ELT. I've taught for 25 years in ELT classrooms. My tools back then were transparencies and overhead projectors, and then later, the photocopier appeared, and that was wonderful, and then interactive whiteboards, and then after that, you've got your iPads and mobile technologies. So this is just a natural progression, and I think what teachers need to do now is to start exploring some of these tools to add to their repertoire of things that they can use to create really engaging learning content for their students, and to create discussions around those, and to be able to especially in times of lockdown and global pandemics and that kind of thing, be able to transport students outside of the classroom. So in my blurb for the talk, I say that I'll be exploring virtual reality as a tool for for supporting teacher development, enhancing student learning, and also looking at the roles played by spatial design, because virtual reality is a very spatial media. You're not just dealing with a flat page, you're dealing with depth and 3 dimensions and 360 degrees of vision. There's the design of that experience. There's how you build narrative into it to make that experience engaging. How do you make it more immersive, or how do you break that immersion if you want to snap students out of that experience, which you may well want to do to get them to reflect on something that they've seen or heard within that environment. I also want to talk about some of the problematic issues that plague VR, and those are, have remained fairly stable since the beginning of VR. And one of those is that it isolates the person that's having the experience. Yeah, the headsets are still quite big and heavy and clunky. They are getting smaller, the cables are disappearing, but they're still not very comfortable, and they do tend to isolate the person wearing them. So that's one of the problems that's plaguing VR. And then we'll talk about some of the pedagogical opportunities that underpin the creation of VR materials, and things to consider pedagogically rather than technologically as you're in the planning stages of creating some kind of virtual reality experience. Later, I'll just talk a little bit about about speech recognition and AI, a little bit about empathy and how virtual reality can improve memory and recall, especially of more didactic information. And I'm just going to generally share the lessons that I've learned along the way. Now, just to reinforce that everything that I've done and I'm going to show you today, they're materials that I've created myself. The skills that I've developed in order to do that came directly out of my ELT teaching. So I don't have any special training in virtual reality or in 360-degree media. I started working on this when I was teaching ELT at a school in Oxford at the time, and just learned as I was going along. So it's more about getting excited about a new form of media and then trying to explore the potential. So what we've got on the screen there is something you may be familiar with. You may not have heard the name before, but this is Dale's Cone of Experience. And this was written by Edgar Dale, and it's essentially just a visual representation of a spectrum of visual media, and that spectrum moves from abstract to concrete. So it's merely descriptive. It's just describing different kinds. So Edgar Dale was very interested in film and where film sat in that spectrum. So you start off, you've got different kinds of media that's very abstract and symbolic, verbal symbols, visual symbols. Then you've got things like radio, which is just sound only. You've got motion pictures or movies, which combine sound with image. And then you've got exhibitions, field trips, and field trips are very popular in VR. I know a lot of teachers have been using VR to send students out of the classroom or to teach online and take them on a virtual field trip to learn about the language related to a specific place. Demonstrations, some sort of dramatic participation, which would be an elaborate role play. And then you've got contrived experience, which is in the title of my talk. And that just sits one step behind doing the real thing. So the real thing, the direct purposeful experience, would be something like doing an internship where you're working, or a placement where you're actually working alongside other people, but still in a position of being a learner or a trainee or an apprentice, that kind of thing. So virtual reality sits, I think, within Dale's category of being a contrived experience. Now, normally the word contrived has a negative connotation. People think of, if a joke is really contrived, then you can see all of the workings of it and it comes across as being a bit artificial. In the context of virtual reality, what I mean by contrived is closer to the word designed. So it's an intentional, designed experience. And sometimes that kind of experience can be more powerful than a direct experience in which you're thrown in at the deep end, because a contrived experience like the kind I'm going to talk about in the context of virtual reality allows you to repeat the experience multiple times. So you can go in, you can make mistakes, you can learn from those mistakes, and then you can go back in and have another go. And the sort of the emotional charge and emotional impact of failing within a contrived experience is much lower than failing in a real life experience. So it can be something that scaffolds learning, in a very powerful way, and reduces that emotional impact of failing, and that sort of attribution of that failure to being something that's intrinsic to yourself, if you want to look at attribution theory. So this kind of experience, I just want to clarify, you may have seen similar things where you get lots of graphics on the internet saying you remember 20% of what you read, and you remember 50% of what you hear, but 80% of what you do. Those things are not scientific. There are actually loads of variations of them all over the internet, and they borrow from Edgar Dale's original spectrum from abstract to concrete, but then they add all of these percentages about how much information you retain from each of those things, which I've not found any scientific evidence to support. So back in 2014-15, I started experimenting. I was teaching on CELTA courses at the time, alongside my own ELT teaching. So I was doing classroom teaching, and then part of my time I was training other teachers to teach English. And that was when I started realizing that in my tutorials with my trainees, they very often found it hard to remember what had taken place in the classroom. That was partly to do with the fact that when you're a new teacher, as you may remember, you're very much concerned with what you're doing and not with what's going on in the classroom. You're worrying about yourself and how you're standing and your body language and what you're saying, and it's very much focused on you. And I found that in the tutorials. So I thought filming some of the micro teaching sessions, so my trainees are only teaching for about sort of 20 to 30 minutes at a time, could be a useful way of getting them to look beyond themselves. And at the time I thought, well, a 360-degree camera, they were just starting to appear on the market as consumer products, would be a really useful tool for not just filming the lesson, but for capturing the more experiential aspect of what it's like to be a student in an ELT classroom. And so I bought a very cheap camera myself. I set it up inside the classroom. I popped it right in the center of the group. I spoke to the teacher about her lesson plan. So this is one of my trainees you can see standing at the front, and they were going to be doing some group work around this central spot. So that's where I plunked the camera and then took some footage. So you'll be able to just see a little bit of that now. And as it shifts, it shows you the 360-degree capturing everyone in the classroom. And then afterwards, if you put the headset on, it enables you to see the classroom in all different directions and to hear in all different directions too, because generally a 360-degree camera, as well as capturing the 360-degree visual space, they have multiple microphones and they capture the 360-degree soundscape. So you've actually got directional audio in that context, which makes it a very different experience to rewatch. So what I would do then is take this footage and get my trainee to put on a virtual reality headset, just a very cheap one back in those days that would cost about 10, 15 pounds. You would put your phone inside it and they could rewatch their initial teaching experience. And what I found from doing that is that it changed the kinds of reflection, the kinds of comments that they were making. They were dehomogenizing the students. They were, instead of talking about the students, en masse as like the group did this or they did that, they were starting to notice a lot more of the individual behaviors that were happening in different segments of the classroom. Another interesting thing was how much they used their bodies as they were looking around the video. So it wasn't like watching the footage from a fixed angle where you just sit back and usually you'd see the back of the students' heads and just see the teacher at the front. She was swiveling around, looking in all directions, gesticulating and pointing as she was doing it. So she really felt as though she was revisiting a lesson rather than watching her lesson. And what this enabled us to do was to have a much more detailed look at what took place in the classroom from the perspective of the students, as well as what was going on with the teacher, the classroom dynamic, how students were interacting with each other, their body language. And it allowed us to have this kind of, I'm using Kolb's reflective cycle here, where you have a concrete experience, you have some kind of critical reflection on that experience, which would take place in the tutorial with me. Then I would get the trainee teacher to talk about what she would have done differently. And then the next time she taught that lesson with a different group, have a try at applying some of those different approaches, in action. And so then you have this very, very productive reflective cycle. So that was looking at reflection. When I moved to Anglia Ruskin University, I started realizing that this technology was really powerful and could be used in other ways beyond reflection. And one day I was filming another teacher, and I was getting her to reflect on her lesson. And I realized, wow, this experienced teacher has a lot more depth to the kinds of things that she's noticing in the classroom. She was really giving a detailed analysis, of the classroom dynamics, and also talking about how her lesson plan had changed in practice. So she'd planned one thing, but then as the class was unfurling, something happened in the class that made her pivot and change direction completely. Excuse me. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to hear from that experienced teacher that I wasn't getting from my trainees, who have far, far, far less experience in the classroom. So this led to a research project where we wanted to look at whether we could capture some of these sort of deep reflective comments from experienced teachers that demonstrated how an experienced practitioner can adapt their teaching and their approach in the classroom as the class is unfurling. And this is something that's quite difficult when you're a new teacher. You tend to stick to your plan regardless of what's actually happening in the classroom. You just want to get through it. So we started a research project. We went into schools, and using a camera, we would capture the lesson. We would interview the experienced teacher about their lesson plan and talk to them about what they planned. And we did this with 4 different teachers. So we did it for English teaching, for maths teaching, for music teaching, and I think the 4th was for religious education. And these were very, very experienced teachers. So we'd capture the lesson, and then I would get that experienced teacher to rewatch the lesson, the same process that we did with the trainees on the CELTA course, and get them to reflect in action. So we were using something called Think Aloud Protocol, where you're talking aloud as you're thinking. So as you're rewatching something, and this is one of the teachers doing exactly that. As you can see, she was just gesticulating there and looking around. And I would record the audio that she was producing as she was describing what was going on in real time in her classroom. And then what we wanted to do was make those insights available to our trainee teachers on the CELTA course, and to our other trainee teachers on the postgraduate certificate in education who are training to be higher education teachers. So we were trying to work out a way that how do we capture all of these insights and make them available to our trainee teachers. So one way was to start looking at different software that we could use, where we could import the 360-degree video and then do some kind of processing on it, where we would add some highlights, where we would add some hotspots to it, that would draw the attention of the person watching the 360-degree media to the important things that were taking place in the classroom. Now, one of the wonderful things about 360-degree video is that you can look around in all directions, but that can also be a curse, because your experienced teacher could be talking about something that's happening in a particular part of the classroom with a small group of students. but the person wearing the headset may not be looking in that direction. So one of the things I realized very quickly is that people were missing important events that were taking place in the classroom. So they could hear the teacher talking, but they were looking in the wrong direction. So that led to us developing like a kind of grammar and syntax, kind of language of attracting attention to things in an environment where people can look wherever they want. They can stare at the ceiling if they want. And that took quite a lot of planning, and a lot of that planning took place just through trial and error and seeing what worked and doing it on paper rather than in technology. Sometimes it's quicker to sketch things out. But the final results you can see in the end picture there was the addition of a layer of digital information that sits on top of the 360-degree video that allows the person who's wearing the headset, in this case the trainee teachers, to pause the video, to zoom in on particular things that were happening. I would put digital microphones inside as well, so they could also record their own thoughts on what was taking place in the lesson. But all of this started out being planned on paper and looking at all of the different tools that I had available to me. So I had sound, and that sound was in 360 degrees. So one of the first sketches I did was looking at how I could use sound to draw attention to particular things that are happening within that 360-degree virtual reality environment. And that works very much as if somebody, somebody's doing this next to your ear, then you'll automatically turn your head to look in the direction of where that sound's coming from. And in virtual reality, it works exactly the same way. The software allows you to position audio within physical space, attach audio to a particular object. So if there's a radio in the classroom, then you could attach sound to the radio and it would sound as if it was coming from that direction. And this proved to be a really useful tool for getting trainees and students afterwards, because a lot of this media is now embedded in our courses across the university, to look where we wanted them to look. Another technique was using background blurring. So when I wanted somebody to look in a particular direction, I would just blur everything else except for the area in which the important action was taking place. I then started looking at how I could darken the background and then just not darken the area that was important. So you'd have this ring of light around the important information. So all of these things became a bit of a headache at the beginning when I was working it out, but then later it got much easier. And so if anybody's thinking of working in this area, experimenting with some of these resources, then I really do hope that you learn from from some of the problems that I'm describing, so that you can avoid these pitfalls. So the final one was how to work with that interactive layer that I mentioned before. That layer when you have hotspots sort of floating in the environment. Those could be things that you just click on or you look at and then they open up. It could be a video, a piece of text. But again, how do you say which of these, how do you identify which of these are the most important things to look at? So on a book, if you're looking at the design of a course book, it's usually fairly clear what the important things are, because a graphic designer will look at the layout of the page and they'll use things like font size, they'll use the site, images to draw attention to specific things on a flat two-dimensional plane. But when all of that information is spread out in 360 degrees, how do you identify what's important? How do you add salience to the most important things? And so one of the things I realized is that, well, I'm working with a three-dimensional environment here. What I can do is make it physically look as though some of those hotspots are closer to you and some of them are further away. And so I can create a spatial metaphor where the important information appears closer to you, so you're much more likely to notice it. Less important information gets pushed back literally into the environment, and you can look at it as an option. So these were things that I had to work out as I was going along. I didn't have any sort of guidebook that would help me do that. So another thing I realized very quickly is that when you pop a virtual reality headset on somebody for the first time, it can be very, very disorienting, especially if they haven't played lots of video games before. They may not be used to that environment. And it is quite a striking experience the first time you pop on a virtual reality headset. So some people were getting a little bit of a shock when they put the headset on, and they felt as though they were disoriented. So I realized, it's better to have people sitting down when they first try virtual reality, so they don't get that disorientation so much. And the other thing was that people would stare straight ahead as if they were watching television. And obviously, when you've got lots of things going on all around you in all directions, that person is going to miss out on a lot if they think of it as being a television that they're watching. And one of the things I realized was that I have to encourage people to look around in all directions and use their head to explore the environment, to look all around, to look up and look down. So I realized that it was necessary to create a kind of lobby area, but not launch people straight into a virtual reality experience without any preparation. So I created a kind of lobby. I put these floating cubes in different spots, one behind, one to the side, one in front. And I made it so that whenever the person would look directly at one of the cubes, it would transform into an object. So it'd be triggered by the person's gaze. So we'd have a dog, a book, a cat, a cup, any of those things. And that would just get them to practice looking around and using their eye focus to trigger different pieces of media. And the same with sound. So I would put sound on the left, sound behind them, sound above them, sound around, and just get them used to it. Now, another thing I noticed very quickly, I could hear people's backs clicking as they were twisting around, which may not be great. I don't know if that's something that could be a health risk of putting your back out, but quickly realized use a swivel chair. That just spins and it allows the person wearing the VR headset, that freedom of movement to look around in all directions. This is especially important if you are if you've shot some footage at the height of the students, where you want them to have that perspective of sitting down in a classroom. Then it's natural to have the viewer watching that video at the same height as the height that the camera was set and positioned when the filming took place. Otherwise, there can be what I call this proprioceptive disconnect, when you feel as though your body and your perception are not matching up. So your eyes are telling you that you're standing, but your body is telling you that you're sitting, and then that can create disorientation. One final thing I noticed is that if we put a fan on, just blowing some fresh air at the person, they're much less likely to feel any kind of motion sickness. And there's a small subset of people who do feel motion sickness when they put on a VR headset. It's something that over time you build up. It's like you build up your sea legs, you gradually get more resistant to it. So, the second time you do it, you're less likely to feel as sick as the first time. And after 3 or 4 times, generally people are fine with it. But there is a very small subset of people who do feel sick. So this is what one of the projects ended up looking like. We went into a classroom. We had the teacher, giving her lesson. And I've got the audio recording of her describing what was going on in the classroom, explaining when things didn't go to plan, which was really insightful. And then I asked her about the classroom and the classroom space. What's going on? Why is the classroom arranged in the way that it is? How does that facilitate the activities that were planned? What else is happening? What are these different boards used for? How is the whiteboard being used? How are these other sort of boards on the left and right being used? One of them was being used to capture important language. Another one was being used to display work, that kind of information that was going on, that was really useful for somebody who hadn't had much experience of working in a classroom. And you can see in the top left there, there is a digital microphone, which would allow the person wearing the headset to record their own thoughts about what was going on in the classroom and what they thought of the lesson and how it was unfolding. So this is what a lesson looked like in practice. This was filmed with a fairly cheap camera. And this camera was set at a distance that was just about the standing height of the students. And then we had a second camera, which we just used Velcro and stuck it to the ceiling. And that was really useful for getting this panoptic top-down view. And here you can see me using that highlighting effect to highlight a certain group of the students who were doing some work in the classroom. And that matched the voiceover narration being provided by the experienced teacher. At any point, the person watching the video can take a look at the lesson plan and see what was happening and then compare it to what had been originally planned and look for any discrepancies there, which would be really interesting. And some of those techniques like magnifying, blurring, zooming were being tested out there. So we found this to be really, really useful, especially in pandemic times, to give our trainees a much more authentic experience of the classroom dynamic as things are happening in real time, a much clearer understanding of teacher pedagogical decision-making, because the voiceover was very insightful. So for example, there were things that our trainees noticed about the lesson, so that it seemed like one student was being excluded. It turns out that that student was on the autistic spectrum, and that the other students in the group knew that, and the student preferred to be on the periphery of that group and only participate when they felt ready and confident to do so. So something that the trainees might criticize as being a negative was actually something that was planned by the teacher and was something that was, you know, being managed. They developed a much better understanding of the classroom as a whole, and what was happening in there, and it did help them to refine their observation skills. So let me just jump in here and show you another example. So this was a major nightmare. So what you'll notice that's different about this from the first shot is that we've got a moving camera, and moving cameras when you're making 360-degree video is a bit of a nightmare, because it can lead to huge amounts of motion sickness. And for anyone that's been in a car where you've been looking out of the side window and suddenly the car goes around a bend and your eyes are telling you, your eyes are looking in one direction, your body's moving in another direction, and you get that lurching feeling. So I realized then that what I could do is just freeze frame the video at certain points, and that would be the time when students would have a look around at what was going on in the environment. This particular scenario was being used to help train social work trainees who were likely to go into houses and visit and perform an assessment to see how independent an elderly person would be, whether they needed any help in getting by at home. But equally within an ELT environment, you could use exactly the same tools to allow somebody to take a virtual visit and then to explore that environment, you know, whether it's a crime scene and it's a puzzle of some kind, you know, to build an escape room. I know escape rooms are very popular at the moment, but using exactly the same tools, you can freeze frame the video, have this information popping up, and including things like multiple choice questions, virtual microphones, embedded text into the environment. So this was something that, again, it created some problems. The motion sickness isn't as bad as it would have been if we'd attached the camera if we just walked along with the camera, because the camera was attached to a wheelchair and the person viewing the video was also sitting down in a swivel chair. And so in many ways, the motion of the camera matched the motion of the person sitting in the chair. So they could swivel, and we encouraged them to do that, to swivel the swivel chair so that they were always facing the same direction as the person who was there. So the results of that, so we got some really powerful comments from students who were using that. We realized that they were feeling a lot more empathy towards the person in the video. They noticed a lot of things from being at the perspective of the wheelchair where the camera was attached. They noticed that the height of the counters made it really difficult for the elderly person to make a cup of tea, for example, or to cook food, just because the heights was too high, which they believed would mean she'd eat lots of ready meals, which may not be good for her diet. Some of them related it to their previous experience of working in the community. Others noticed practical problems and some health hazards and risks in the house, like overloaded plug sockets, a bathroom that didn't allow her to rotate in the wheelchair as she was going around. So all in all, these were really powerful experiences for getting students to notice things. Similarly, I've been into hospitals to create scenarios that were used to train radiotherapists in the kind of language that they should be using when they're talking to patients who are about to undergo cancer therapy, who are in a highly anxious state. So you've got this very stressful situation in which you're going in for cancer treatment. What kind of language should the radiotherapists use to help reduce those levels of anxiety? What kind of instructions should they use to talk to the patient, to prepare them for what's about to come? So, sports science, again, that's another context that we've used it in. So the point I'm making here is that it doesn't really matter what you're teaching. Language is always about something. It's never exists in a vacuum. It's not an abstract thing. It's always used to talk about something. And many of your students, then hopefully don't all want to grow up to be language teachers, or they're not all heading that direction. They want to be physiotherapists, they want to be doctors, or they want to be firefighters. And all of those different contexts require different language. And so virtual reality is a fantastic tool for teaching English for specific purposes. And the tools that you have available to you now that enable you to blend traditional media. So in this case, you can see I'm using a tool to add in some multiple choice questions, to drop in a bit of traditional video. This lesson was all about motion capture in sports and how athletes can use motion capture technology to improve their performance, to improve how they run, to improve how they hit a ball, for example, all of these things. And this particular video was used to introduce students to the facilities in the university ahead of when they would arrive in the in the space themselves. So they'd signed up for a degree course. They hadn't yet arrived on campus, but they could see some of the kinds of facilities and some of the activities that they would be doing when they did arrive. These little pop-ups that you can have there will show you what's going on the screen. It can just add that little extra of information explaining what's going on, how the data is being analyzed. And a lot of the software now that comes with virtual reality, whether it's Uptail, which I was using, or VAR, many of the other platforms, I think ThingLink as well, give you some analytics where you can have a look at a particular student. You can see how many times they've repeated the experience, what they've been looking at. So this one's been looking at task-based learning tips, which was one of the hotspots in my CELTA scenario. And you can get all of this useful data coming in that can help you to improve the design of the experience, and also to have a conversation with the students about what they've been looking at. Moving forwards, there are other technologies that I'm exploring at the moment. Heat mapping is one, in which the software gives you a sort of heat map. You can see those blobby colors that show you the attention of the student that's been wearing the headset. So what they've been looking at, what they've been focusing their attention on, and what they've missed, which makes for a really interesting tutorial and a conversation where you can talk about why they focused on particular things, why they missed particular things. And increasingly now, machine learning is getting fantastic at transcription. As I've shown you in a few examples, you can embed digital microphones into VR environments that allow somebody to speak. This is fantastic. For example, if you have students that are nervous about giving presentations, you can create a VR scenario that they can try at home just with their mobile phone and a headset, where they're in front of an audience and they can practice their talk. Their slides will appear virtually in front of them. You can put some hotspots with keywords to remind them to mention different things. And then the software will take care of recording their speech, and then it will do a transcription. So here was a transcription of somebody doing a lesson observation. And that language can then be analyzed by the students, so they can look at the language that they've produced. They can also show that to their teacher and have a discussion about the language and whether the register is appropriate for the kind of presentation that they're giving. And the fact that they can go in and repeat that experience multiple times reduces their anxiety level about public speaking and enables them to actually practice giving their presentation multiple times before they set foot in the classroom and have to stand up in front of a group of their peers. This particular software also gives you some other analytics. It tells you the frequency of words, so how often you repeated the same word, which is quite useful for noticing things like little tics that you may have, like using actually a lot. It also tells you the information density, so how much information you packed within that section of speech. Looking ahead, I did mention, I'm running out of time now. There are lots of new technologies now that we're looking at in the university. One of the main questions is, how do we apply these to to language teaching? And I think one of the keys there is to remember that language teaching is always contextualized. Your students may want to use English in the context of being a firefighter or a police officer. They may want to be some, working with sports, with athletes. They may want to be pilots. All of those things require particular language. Some of the different technologies that we have available to us now are about creating a much more realistic, contrived experience in which you really feel emotionally as if you're there and physically as if you're there. This is a special suit that enables you to feel heat and pressure. It monitors your stress levels, your heartbeat, so it can tell how anxious you're getting in a particular situation. And we also have things like haptics, in the form of being able to pick up virtual objects. So this goes back to the CGI side of virtual reality, where you can pick up objects, you can hand objects to people, and generally have a much more social experience where multiple people are collaborating within a virtual environment. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I'm aware that I'm eating into my Q&A time, and just pop back and ask Eric if we have any questions that have come up. Let me just have a quick look in the Q&A here.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Paul. Sorry, just had to find my on button there. Yes, we've had a few questions. Interesting one from Joan O'Connell about the use of the 360-degree cameras. Won't you need permission from parents to use the 360-degree camera? And I would add, not just necessarily parents, but also adults within the teacher training construct.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we went into primary schools for that research project, then we got permission from the parents, and written permission from the parents. It went through ethical approval, and we also got permission verbally from the students. So we actually asked them, "Are you okay with this?" Because we needed to explain to the students as well. It wasn't just the parents that we wanted permission from. We wanted permission from the students. So yeah, absolutely, you need permission, and that has to include what kind of use you're going to make of the materials. So our materials were all for educational purposes, for our training courses, and for dissemination of the use of the technology. So we were very clear about that. With adults, it's much easier. It's the same as just recording with a normal video. You can get them to just sign something. But yeah, definitely you need permission in the same way you would with any kind of filming.
Super, thank you. Interesting question from James Dunn, who says, I see you're using the Oculus Go, which isn't sold or supported anymore. Have you upgraded to a Quest or Quest 2? If not, why not? And if so, has the new tech changed what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, generally, you'll see in education that the technology, usually when you purchase something as a school, it has to last. So you try to eke out that technology for as long as you possibly can. For 360-degree video, the original Oculus Go's were absolutely fine. We didn't need anything more than that. But we have the Vive 3. We've also got some HoloLens 2s set up, and we've got some Oculus Quest 1s. We haven't got the Oculus Quest 2 yet, but we've got the Oculus Quest 1. Yeah, it's a constant race. What's happening now is we're finding that the inside-out tracking of things like the Oculus Quest, and inside-out tracking means you don't need to have these towers that are scanning your body movements. So for some of our virtual reality experiences that are full body, We've got these towers up that are laser scanning you and mapping your movements. A lot of the new headsets now, they have cameras built in and gyroscopes, and they can match your movement and your orientation in 6 degrees of freedom without the need for all of those cables and things like that. So you do sacrifice power for convenience, and at the moment the standalone headsets are not quite as good as the ones that are plugged into a powerful PC, but then you've got the cables to worry about. But yeah, constantly upgrading. It does get expensive, but an Oculus Go or even a phone, for everything that I've shown you today, all of this stuff will work on a phone inside a £15, Google Cardboard. I know they've been discontinued, but or the equivalent plastic one.
Super, thank you. And I think we've got just time for one more question. What software did you use for the speech analysis?
Right, so we use there's a French company that I've been working with called Uptale, UPTALE, so tail as in story, Uptale, and they use, I think it's Amazon Web Services. They've got some sort of software that's connects with that does the transcription for you. And generally, it's not real time. But it generally takes a couple of minutes before you get the analytics back. And that does the speech recording, the speech analysis, transcription, and also does the heat mapping that I showed, where you can see what people have been paying attention to. So you get all of those analytics within the same software that you use to create the experience, which is really useful. VIAR 360 is another, I think it's a Slovenian company. They do something similar as well.
That's super, thank you. I think we've run out of time there. But so thank you very much, Paul, for all of your thoughts and information.
Very welcome. Yeah, I'm sorry I went on a little bit longer. I did say I had lots of slides.
That's
hopefully useful there.
That's okay. So, Emily, I think, is just letting us know in the chat window that anybody who's interested in discussing this a bit further, you're welcome to join the networking session on Zoom. The link is in the chat window. Paul, I'm not sure if you'll be able to join us for that. If not, that's totally understandable. But folks in the audience, if you'd like to join and carry on the conversation, that's an excellent forum in which to do it.
I've just dropped in the link to Uptale as well. Did you say you're meeting just now after this at 9 a.m.? Okay, yep. On the link. I'll try to. I think I am supposed to be at work, but I'll see what I've got going on, and if I can drop in there, then I definitely will.
Brilliant.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Paul. Thank you very much. And thank you to the audience for attending and for all of your questions. And hope to see you again over the next couple of days. Thanks all. Bye-bye for now.